I'm Maggie. Welcome to Experiments in Crafting. Tonight I've got a couple things I want to talk about. So it's about a week out. I think it's exactly a week out from Christmas Eve. And so I thought I'd talk about some last minute Christmas gifts. We've got one weekend in there that you might be able to get a couple more things done. And so I was going to talk about some last minute quick suggestions. And then somebody last week asked for some suggestions on sock yarn. And I've shown some of my sock yarn before in the past, but I thought I'd drag it back out and share some of that with you guys. And then I'll just take questions from the live chat. So welcome everyone who's joining me. I see that several of you have said hello in the comments, so welcome. Thanks for joining me tonight. But yeah, so I've got my computer out and I'm gonna just sort of start on Ravelry and show you guys some suggestions for some last minute Christmas gifts. So I'm gonna start there. If there's anything you guys have questions about Ravelry, Instagram, things like that, I can answer those questions while I've got my computer out as well. All right, so just starting here on the Ravelry homepage. One of the things that came to mind was a lot of times if you've got a last minute gift for a friend or somebody who's got a kid about, well, usually a girl about, 6 to 11, somewhere in there. One of the options that I was thinking of might be to do a hat set for a girl and a doll. So if you get on, you can really use any hat pattern. I'm going to switch to crochet patterns here, and just to narrow some down, I'm going to switch to free patterns. But one of the things that I'm going to look for is patterns that are available in different sizes. Let me see if I can find here. So if you go over here to gender, age, size, fit, we're looking for age or size. And what we want is either doll, but you can see there that doll only has 242 options. But newborn has almost 2,000 options. And a newborn hat fits an American Girl doll perfectly. A preemie hat fits a American Girl bitty baby, like a 15-inch doll. So preemies for 15-inch dolls, like a bitty baby, and newborn for 18-inch, similar to an American Girl or any of the Target brand, Walmart brand versions of the 18-inch American Girl style doll. So if you find a pattern that is available in child and in preemie or newborn, depending on what you're looking for. So I'm going to actually choose newborn here. So these hats are available. I think it's set to... Okay, so if you go up here, you can see that the filters up here is child and newborn size. So I'm only getting ones that are available in both. You can change that over... Let's see where we at here. So down here where I've selected out of the fit, you could change it to match any of these, which gives you or. So that would give you patterns that are available in preemie or in child size. What I want is one that's available in both. So I'm looking through here. So I've got it set to crochet patterns. I've got it set to include child and newborn hats. And I thought I turned on free as well. I did. I turned on free. So these would give you some options that you could make a matched set in. And you can see like this princess crown. This designer did just that. It's a matched set for a child and a doll. But any of these would be viable options. So that's a really quick last minute gift that you can make for anybody who has a doll. I don't want to say just little girls, but mostly little girls who might have a doll that they would like to match. So obviously hats are a good a good gift, last minute gift for anybody. They work up quickly, but as a sort of a set, a matched set for a girl and a doll seemed like a good last minute idea. I already pulled up this search here. One of the things that I don't know that a lot of people know of are boot cuffs. Boot cuffs are a really, really quick, easy to work up thing. It's not as much as a full pair of socks or something like that, but it's just a little thing that goes on your calf and then tucks into the top of your boots so that it looks like you've got these long accents. So you can see here, this person's wearing boots and the boot cuff is just sticking out of the top. But you can see the piece is only a little thing with a ribbed section. So these are a nice, simple, easy project. People like them. But they're really, really good last minute projects. So there's a variety here. This one looked particularly interesting. It uses just a tiny bit of a bunch of colors here. So if you've got some like leftover skeins of yarn from other projects, or maybe you made a scarf and you want to do something to match it, you've got a little bit left over. These are really easy to just throw together last minute. So one of the things I was going to show, so here's a hat that I made back when we were talking about the doll. Here's a hat that I made for like a bitty baby sized doll. This was a little last minute set that I put together. A doll dress, little shoes, a hat, and then a crochet edge blanket, all in sort of a Christmassy theme. So you can see there's the whole set, but there's the doll wearing the hat, and that was just made out of a newborn or a preemie sized hat. I have mentioned before that I always use Allie Crafts hats, and so that was made from the preemie size pattern of the Allie Crafts hat. That's a free pattern, just called Ear Flapped Hat, and if you search Allie Crafts, you get it. And that's available in all of these different sizes. So I'm not really sure why, but for whatever reason, I do really, really well with this designer. So that Allie Crafts I do particularly well. My hats always seem to turn out the right size when I follow her patterns. I think I was talking about last week, I showed some hats that I made just a little bit too big. And, yeah, for whatever reason, a lot of other patterns, my hats end up a little bit too big, a little bit too small. Her patterns seem to be dead on. So I don't know if I just crochet like exactly the same as she does, but those ones in particular work out really well for me. So, but you could easily see doing a matched hat here for a girl and a doll. So, let's see. I was kind of just scrolling through my projects here just to see what I've got that could be done last minute. A lot of these big shawls and things are not good options to start, today for Christmas. But small things like fingerless gloves. I've mentioned this before. I can zoom in a little bit so you guys can see a little bit better. But I really like the Heart of a Rock Star pattern. This is a paid pattern. But I think they turn out really nicely. They've got a really interesting texture. And so fingerless gloves are a good option. One of the other things that I wanted, I've also mentioned in the past, crochet edge blankets. So let me zoom in just a little bit here. This is a little bit trickier because you would have to have a skip cutter or you would have to go get a skip cutter. But these do work up really, really fast. So if you got a skip cutter, you cut your fleece. I would recommend just doing a single layer fleece blanket. They make just a nice, simple project. They go really quickly. Double layer fleece takes a lot more effort because you've got to keep the two layers from shifting. So it takes a little bit more time to get used to working with. You've got to get your hook through both layers. They're not difficult, but they are slower to work with. So since we're a week out from Christmas, I would, if you're gonna do a fleece edge blanket, definitely I would do one layer. You can just get some fleece from Joann Fabric, some remnant fabric, and a skip cutter, and go to town. So, several of my live streams, I guess I shouldn't say several, a couple of live streams we've talked about fleece edge blankets. One of them has a bit more of a tutorial in it. If you go back through the live videos. So, last thing I was going to suggest, this is a project I shared on Instagram, I don't know, around May or June. I made it really last minute to go with part of a wedding shower gift. But you can make a couple of washcloths. They only take a little while. You can pick pretty much any stitch pattern you want, or you can find a washcloth pattern on Ravelry. But any basic stitch that you want to do, you can just make a square of. You can put an edge on it. You can put no edge. Just basically make a square. And then what I recommend is do a couple of them. If you know the recipients, like if you know what their bathroom looks like or you know what their kitchen looks like, you can pick a couple colors that will go with that. I would use natural fibers, so cotton or linen, things like that. Not necessarily wool. You'd probably be okay with like a cotton polyester blend. Something like this, I used Re-Up. Re-Up was a recycled yarn that Lion Brand made. I don't know if it's available anymore. Re-Up got kind of a weird bad rap, and I'm not really sure why, because it really worked up pretty well. It looked pretty nice when it was all said and done. And I really didn't have any major issues with Re-Up. It was a little bit splitty. It wasn't like, don't get me wrong, you definitely didn't want to make a sweater out of it or something, but it was dishcloth yarn, and dishcloth yarn that's a little bit scratchy seems normal. I don't think that I'm trying to think what the standard dishcloth yarn is. The Lily Sugar and Cream, it doesn't feel amazing, and I wouldn't want to make a sweater out of it either. But I thought this came in cool colors. It was high recycled content according to the label, though I couldn't verify that through any additional literature. But I think the takeaway here is if you package them really nicely, so in this case, I just folded them in half and then half again, stacked the 3 up, made sure that they laid really nicely together, and then just tied them with a ribbon. These went with the bride's wedding colors, and so I just went with that kind of color scheme. But anything that matches your recipient's kitchen, if you don't know what their kitchen looks like, you could do it in Christmas colors, or you can do it in just some neutral grays or something like that. And they just make really nice, fast gifts. So, and I don't want to scroll through Instagram. So, anyway, those are sort of some last minute suggestions. So, washcloths, maybe a hat set, a matched set of a child's hat and a doll hat, boot cuffs, fingerless gloves, really quick and easy things. Certainly hats, certainly cowls, depends on how fast you work things up. But I wouldn't get into big projects. So it's really too late to be starting a blanket, unless you're talking about an edged blanket, like a crochet edge around a blanket. It's too late really to do a full-length scarf. If you crochet really fast, you could probably do it in a heavy yarn, but to get a scarf made, blocked, wrapped, all ready to go in a week, that's a pretty tall order for most people. But a cowl, you can usually make it much, much shorter, and then it wears a lot closer. So you've got that option. So it's not too late at this point to do a crochet gift or two. It's probably too late to do your entire gift list, depending on how much you've got left to do before Christmas and, you know, how much time you can devote to making things. But yeah, so just thought I'd go over that. I don't know if you guys have any questions or other suggestions, we can talk about those. If you've got other questions about Ravelry, or about Instagram or anything like that, I'd be happy to talk about those things while I've got my computer out. I know we've talked about sock yarn in the past, but we've had a couple questions last week about favorite sock yarns and things like that. So I'm going to push my computer forward, and I can always pull it back out if you guys have questions about projects or things like that. I'm going to push that out of the way. I don't want to close it all the way, but get that out of the way, and then I'm going to start pulling out some sock yarns, I guess. No. Okay. So one of the things that I mentioned last week is these fiber optic gradients. So fiber optic makes gradient yarn, but then they also make a, you can get either end of the gradient. And so this is an example of that. This is the Rouge Violet Cerulean gradient, and then the cerulean end. So what you would do here is you'd either start with the cerulean end and then continue with the cerulean end of the gradient, or you would start with your red end of the gradient, work to cerulean, and then you'd work to cerulean and then continue on with your cerulean full skein. So I did that with the shawl that I made for my wedding. So this, I started with, this is gold to damson. So I started with the damson end, or I started with my damson skein, and then continued with the damson end of my gradient. So the whole first skein would have been similar to working this whole first skein, and then I would have started with the blue end of this and continue out. In this case, it would have gone to red if I had used this colorway. So you can see those are different, but same concept. So as far as favorite sock yarns, Fiber Optics has become a really, really strong contender and one of my favorites. I think I have one other set of theirs. Trying to see if it's in this bin. I've got a giant bin here that you guys can't really see on camera, but it might be in the lower bin. But yeah, so the other option, if you don't do a Fiber Optics style where you can do 200 grams of yarn, you can get a larger skein. So this is by Wendy's Wonders, and this is a 600 yard skein, so it's probably 150 grams, which allows you to have a little bit larger shawl and still get a gradient. And so if I unwrap this a little bit, you can see there's a really good example of the gradient, if I can get that on camera. This works from pink to sort of a lime green, to blue, to purple, to magenta, and then dark gray to light gray. And so your gradient portion is really like right here, and then it sort of fades out to more of a solid gray with a lot less gradient going on. So this is sort of a combo of the fiber optic yarns where you can, you've got sort of an edge that it fades out to, but you've got more of it. Let's see. Few people joining us midstream. Helen, welcome. I'm glad you made it. Stampin' Bandits saying gorgeous colors. I think that popped up during the fiber optic when I had that out. Jake asking if we can do a review on Premier Retro Velvet Yarn. That one's not one I'm familiar with, but I'd certainly look into it. Premier's got a new yarn out, which I can't remember the name of it. It's some sort of like lightly twisted color changing yarn. So I was thinking about ordering some of that. If I come across Retro Velvet, I can probably get some of that together as well. I assume, okay, it looks just like the Crushed Velvet or the Velux yarns from Bernat and Lion Brand. So I assume that it's very similar, but yeah, we could, I can try and get my hands on some of that. Let's see, what else do I have in here? As far as favorite sock yarns, I love sock yarns. I could talk about sock yarn all day. Part of the thing is that it really matters what I'm making. So there are certain brands and certain things that I will go after versus other ones. I think I mentioned before, I have a shawl that I really like. Let me see if I can find it here. Yeah. So I have this shawl that I really like. I made this a long time ago. But this shawl is made out of BFL, and BFL is Blue-Faced Leicester. And it's really an interesting yarn. It's not soft and cozy. It doesn't have like a ton of squish to it. But it looks stunning. And you can see all of the lace section in here has really held up. It hasn't collapsed in on itself. Like I struggle to even show you what would happen if it collapsed. A lot of my other yarns, I'll just grab one for example here. For example, this yarn here. Not this one here. Let's try this one. So this one here is just regular merino, and you can see the lace has sort of collapsed on itself. If we go back to zoomed in, you can still see the lacy sections, but when this was blocked, it was really, really open and wide. And over time, it wants to spring back and relax. And it still looks very nice, but really, really needs to be reblocked. The BFL just, it holds up so nicely. And really, you can see the stitch definition really, really beautifully. Even on camera, you can see that these are all post stitches, and you can see the ridges that it formed. You can see the lace sections really well. And then it goes back and forth between ridged and lace sections here. But if I'm looking for something that I know is going to be a wrap, and it's going to be more of an accessory and less of a thing for warmth. So if I want a scarf for winter, where I know I want to snuggle into it and be warm, I want merino. It's softer, it's cozier. If I want a scarf for spring, where it's going to be an accessory and maybe it's going to cover my shoulders if I want to wear a tank top, and it's, late spring and it could be cool out, but mostly I'm wearing it because I want it to be an accessory. I'm going to look for a different type of yarn than I'm going to for warmth. So hopefully that makes sense. I definitely pick and choose based on the intended use. Let's see. Runaway Needle Red is joining us. Welcome. Jake's filling in a few. So it was the Premier Spun colors, I believe, that I was talking about. Is the loosely spun one with the color changing that I looked interesting online, but I wanted to give that a try. And Runaway Needle Red's saying the Retro Velvet's a lot like Parfait. I really enjoyed Parfait, even though I ran into a lot of problems with it as far as the Parfait layers had some color change issues. But I really enjoyed the yarn itself. So I would bet that Retro Velvet just comes in adult colors, where Parfait comes in primarily baby colors. So, yeah. Stephanie's saying that she loves sock yarns. We'll be going to a new local yarn store this weekend in a different city. That's awesome. I really like when I get out of town and try some new yarn stores. Over Thanksgiving, we were at my sister's, and I was able to go to the Yarn Hollow, and got some good stuff. And that was the first time I had been there. Primarily, we end up going to shows, it seems, but I do make it to a lot of yarn stores. I was thinking about that the other day, and I've been to quite a few in my area, and now I've been to several in the Chicago area, and a few elsewhere. Madison, Wisconsin's got a really nice craft market, and we went to that Arnie's in northern Michigan. So, but not Upper Peninsula, northern regular Michigan. So been to a bunch of them. So, let's see. I mean, I can just keep talking about sock yarn. So if we want to talk about sock yarn, like I'll keep pulling stuff out and talking about that. Do you guys have specific questions about sock yarn? I don't remember who last week asked to talk about favorite sock yarns, but if you guys have specific questions, I can pull specific things out. Or if you guys have questions about something else, you want me to go back to the computer and we can look around at some patterns some more. You guys tell me what sounds interesting. So. Alright, Runaway Needle Red saying that, yeah, it's mostly jewel colors in the Retro Velvet. And that she skipped the parfait layers but like the regular parfait. I haven't come across much regular parfait. I've seen it in a couple places, but I really liked the concept of parfait layers. You got so much yarn packed into the ball. It was really, really tightly wound 200-gram ball, but they really had some issues with color continuity. The colors were supposed to be in a 1-2-3 1-2-3 pattern. So it might have been like one of them I had was blue and then speckled and then gray and then blue speckled gray. But a lot of the balls in the store were 1-2-3 2-1-1 or like just an utter mess. Some colors were missing. Some colors were in the wrong order. They had attached them backwards, so you ended up with like a 1-2-3 3-2-1. So yeah, it was just sort of a mess. Jake saying Michaels has normal parfait. I don't think mine does, but mine has a really terrible yarn section. It's maybe one aisle. And it's not a particularly big aisle. Stephanie's saying that she was one of the people asking about sock yarn. Wants to know how you can tell if a sock yarn's going to be speckly only a little bit as opposed to changing speckles every couple stitches. Alright, so we can take a look at that. Alright. So this yarn here, so as it sits like this, you can see that there's chunks of color. When you see chunks of color like this, you're going to be looking at a yarn that's going to change every couple of stitches, and you're probably going to get some color pooling. So if we look at, you can see there's a big chunk of, so without even unwrapping this, I can tell you it's, well, it could be one of two things. It could be a gradient, or it could be a, what is the word I want? Variegated yarn. So if I open this up, I'll quickly learn that it's not a gradient because the color is all the way through the section. On a gradient yarn, you would have multiple colors layering on top of each other here. So let me turn that and show you what I mean. This whole chunk right here between my fingers is all the same color. In a gradient yarn, it would be multiple colors because this is as the yarn is wound in a circle. So on a gradient yarn, this little chunk would be a color, this little chunk would be a color, this little chunk would be a color, and it would be changing throughout. so the color changes on this yarn switch as you go around in a circle. And if you think about that, if I start picking this yarn up and working it, I'm going to get a little chunk of this sort of gray-brown, and then kind of a larger chunk of white with speckles, like 2 stitches of gray, 2 stitches of white, 2 more stitches of gray, 2 more stitches of white, back and forth, back and forth. And then you're going to come back around here and you're going to get a chunk of this gray-brown again. And then, I don't know, 6, 8 stitches of green. And then all the way back around. And so when you work this up, you're going to end up with little chunks of color. It's going to end up like this. This scarf right here had a skein that looked very, very similar. Let me open this up and lay it out. So when this was wrapped up, you can see it was little chunk of dark purple, little chunk of really bright blue, bigger chunk of bright purple, teeny tiny chunk of bright blue, bigger chunk of really dark purple. Maybe we can zoom in on this a little bit. But yeah, you can see, because I'm working back and forth like this, that's the same, how do I want to say this? I was working back and forth, but you're pulling the yarn as it was wound around in a circle. So, and obviously I had caked mine up, but it would be the same as if I was picking this yarn up and pulling out of the big loop. So little, you've got 6 stitches here of bright purple, and then a couple of tiny stitches of this really bright blue, and then another 6 stitches of really dark purple, couple of stitches of really bright blue. And so that works back and forth. And so you end up with a yarn like this. So this skein I've got here is going to work up very much like this shawl. Let me flop back. So, but yeah, so a yarn like that, most of the time, if you're in a store and you can't tell, a lot of people, I shouldn't say all of them, but most of them will let you open the hanks up. So I've never had anyone get like particularly mad at me for opening a hank up and look at what it looks like, because it's pretty difficult to tell. If they're not super into you opening them up, they may you can just ask, is this a gradient? Is this going to be speckly? How is this going to work up? And the reason I say that is, let me find a gradient yarn. So this Fiber Optics yarn here. While it's hanked like this, it's very, very difficult to tell that it's a gradient. It doesn't really look any different than this yarn does. So, and obviously colors look different, but you've got a chunk of red, you've got a chunk of blue, and it's sort of hard to tell what's going on here. And the only way really to know what's going on is, again, to unhank it and get this big loop. And this is what I was talking about before. Now, the yarn between my hands, you can see there's a chunk of red at the top, and then it goes to purple, and then it goes to dark blue, and then out to cerulean. And you can see that the colors are changing all the way around. So all the way around, you're going to pick up red and more red and more red, and then it will eventually fade into purple, fade into dark blue, fade into cerulean. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense as far as the gradient. You can definitely see the difference in this hank and this hank, where everything in the loop right now is the same color or the same speckly, where this shows you the whole gradient. Even though they looked relatively similar when they were hanked up. I am really not great at doing this part. It also goes a lot easier if you have a second person. Um, so when you spin them up like this, and then the trick here is that when you get to this point, kind of needs somebody to grab a hold of it and help you spin it this way. Without letting go of either end and without losing all your tension. And my hanks end up kind of floppy, but it does the job for the most part. Get that back on there. As far as a really speckly yarn, this is obviously just speckles all the way through. Very little change all the way around. This is what I would call a speckled yarn. Like, this one's painted like speckles. You're gonna end up actually with a much more uniform looking piece than something like this. This is going to work up in little chunks, where this is going to work up almost like a solid color, but the solid color is speckles. So there's not really going to be any change all the way through. It's just going to be speckled everywhere. Let's see. What else can I show? This yarn is going to look more... It's not going to look exactly like this, but it's going to look more like this, where it's a little bit more uniform. And there's obviously spots where I can pick out, like, this stitch is blue, but the next stitch is gray, and the next stitch is pink. And that sort of gets, repeated all over the place. I have a terrible... I don't know why. I'll never be able to figure that out, apparently. But yeah, you can see that it's more uniformly colored, but the color is speckles. If that makes sense. So that'll be more similar to this style of yarn. Let's see. Jake's asking if we can look at some easy blanket patterns on Ravelry. I can pull my computer out in just a few seconds. And show you a couple of ones that I've liked in the past. Okay. Stephanie is saying, that helps. Do I know any local yarn store brands that have good gradients? I don't. So, here's the thing. Really good gradients are generally indie dyed. And so most local yarn stores do carry a few indie dyed. Some carry a lot. I don't know that I've been to any that don't have any hand dyed or indie dyed yarns. At least not any decent yarn store. But as far as gradients go, they're really time consuming. And so that means that they're generally done by indie dyers. They're also generally quite a bit more expensive. I can't come up with any off the top of my head that I can think of that are done by big yarn store brands. I don't think Cascade has any. I don't think Plymouth has any. Those are your big ones. I don't think Haiku does, that I can think of off the top of my head. Yeah. So, I guess, yeah, I'm not saying that you won't find any in a local yarn store. I just don't know of any brands that carry gradients. Helen's asking what pattern did I just show? I had a couple things on screen. So I had this one, I had this gray one, and I had the dragon. Where'd that go? This one. So, if you tell me which one that you were wondering about, we can pull them up. I I'm gonna pull my computer back out so I can find these real quick. I think this one is Capriccio by Ricci New Designs. This one is Lizard. I don't remember the designer's name off the top of my head. And this one is like Rowan Berry or something. Shawl? So. Runaway Needle Red's asking what's the difference between gradients and ombres. I think there's probably two things. Ombre implies that it's all the same color all the way through. So it usually goes from dark to white. All right, hold on one second. Sorry. Ombre usually goes from dark to white and then fades in and gets lighter and lighter and lighter all the way through. So if you think of on your computer, like you can change the color and it usually goes from the really, really darkest version to the almost white version. That's sort of like an ombre is that whole spectrum. Like Lion Brand has a ombre yarn that what is that called? Faye, I think. That you can get. But at least in my head, that's how I define ombre. Gradient yarns usually fade from one color to another color, and can hit other colors in between. So in the case of this yarn here, it fades from red to cerulean and stops at like a reddish purple, a deeper purple, and then a dark blue, and then all the way out to cerulean. Helen's saying I twisted it before I put away. Unless you're talking about the yarn, which would be this. This is Fiber Optics yarn. It wasn't a scarf. It's yarn ready to work. I had a couple other ones. This one I had out is a Malbrigo Viola. Well, it's Malbrigo Machita, and the color is Viola. So yeah. Let's see. Lion Brand Mandala is gradient somewhat. Mandala Baby is a pretty decent gradient. Regular Mandala tends to be more like hard color stops. The best big box gradient that I can think of is actually Lion Brand Shawl in a Cake or Shawl in a Ball. And let's see. So I don't know if I'm necessarily right about the difference between gradient and ombre, but like that's sort of how I've seen them talked about and how I distinguish them is gradients have these nice smooth color changes, usually from one color to a totally different color. Ombres tend to be from a dark version of a color out to nearly white. And they always stay in the same color family. Let's see. Jake's asking about blankets. We're going to get to those in just a minute here. So somebody was asking about patterns. So we'll do a couple of things here. One, we were going to look at some blanket patterns that I've made. I'm not sure if she... So my husband's asking if I found the pattern that Helen was asking about. I'm not sure if when I had the yarn out, if it looked like a scarf. Or if I'm misunderstanding. But I've got a couple here. So I'm going to find the 3 shawl patterns real quick. No, that's not what it's called. Oh, you know what? So, the pattern this pattern here, I've got up on screen is the Rowan Berry Shawlette. That's this purple and aqua one that I have. This is worked back and forth, and you work this edging as you work the shawl. So it's a four row repeat. So on one row you make the loop, on the next row you do these little double crochets, on the following row you do the little berries on the ends. And so that's the Rowan Berry shawl. The gray shawl that I had out before is called Lizard. I always refer to it as a dragon wing, but it's definitely called Lizard. That is by Jasmine Morbin Designs, we're going to go with, because I can read that one. I'm not 100% sure on that pronunciation there. But that is... this is not my shawl, but looks very similar to the one that I showed earlier. So that's a lizard pattern. This is a super easy pattern once you get past the first 9 rows. So for whatever reason, I stumbled a lot on the first 9 rows. And then after that, it is smooth sailing from there. It works up super easy. It's a 6 row repeat. You do 6 well, it's a 12 row repeat. You do 6 rows of the same thing, and then you do another 6 rows of the next thing. And the last one was this gray one that had all of the speckles through it of different colors, and I'm pretty sure that one is... yeah, let's try that. This one here. Yeah. Okay, so so Helen, the shawl that I just put away is the Capriccio shawl. That is this gray one with the speckles that I said needs to be reblocked. That's this shawl here. That is the Capriccio shawl by Rachie Newen Designs. It's a paid pattern, but very well written. What's that? Yeah, you can see in the picture, it's super open. This fits really well. But it took a block really well, but it didn't hold it. And I think if I had worked this out of BFL, it may have held itself open a little while longer. So this is a fun shawl to work up. Her patterns are always really well written, so it's worth a few dollars to get it. Okay, we're gonna take a look at some blanket patterns. So hands down, my favorite blanket pattern to work up is this diamond blanket pattern. Let me find it in my projects here. It's this one here. So this is super easy to work up. It looks complicated, but all it is double crochets and chains. So no worries, Helen. Sorry, you don't have to apologize. I just wasn't sure which one we were talking about. I had a lot out on the table, so I'm glad we figured it out, and hopefully that helps. Jake, thanks for the feedback. My husband's double checking on audio, seeing what's going on. Like I mentioned last week, we're using a different streaming setup, so things should be generally more reliable, but we're still getting used to how the audio and video sync up. So if there's problems, let us know, so that we can deal with them quickly, and you guys aren't being bugged by bad audio or things out of sync or whatnot. Stephanie's saying that she made a shawl with Red Heart It's a Wrap Rainbow, and it came out really well, and that she loved that it changed one strand at a time. I really do like stranded cotton yarns. So, I don't know. I think they're really cool. They take a little bit of getting used to, because you're not working with a twisted yarn. You've got the strands that aren't like linked together in any fashion, so you got to be really careful not to miss a strand. But other than that, it works really well to have it's a really cheap way to do a gradient because they can just change one strand out and it just keeps working. When they make a gradient yarn, depends on the company, but generally how I've seen it done is that they have to be knit into a sock blank, which is basically just a tube that they make with a knitting machine. So they put the one end of yarn in, they knit it into a round tube, and then they can paint on or dip dye different yarns in different colors and like sort of blend them together like a painter. And then the sock blank has to be pulled out. So you grab the one end and you wind it all back up, and that takes a lot of work. You've got to, generally those knitting machines are hand cranked, and so you have to crank it up into a sock blank and then go through the trouble of gradient dyeing it and then pull it back out. You can see this yarn definitely went through that process. It's got this like crinkly texture to it. So like it was knit into a sock blank and then pulled back out. This goes away when you work it up. Like all the little crinkles don't stay in here, but you can see like it definitely was knit in a sock blank and pulled out. But gradients are time consuming for the dyer and they're expensive because they're time consuming. And so a thing like a stranded cotton is a lot less time consuming, can be done at like a commercial scale. And so it ends up being a lot better as far as price. But then it's got other issues, like I was saying, where you got to really just be paying attention and being careful. So if we flip back to my computer, what I was mentioning is that this diamond blanket is hands down my favorite baby blanket. It can be modified to make a larger blanket. And I just think it's a really, really classic looking blanket and super easy. Interesting enough to keep me occupied, or my mind occupied anyway. It's not super repetitive because you got to pay attention to where all your holes are going. And so it works up really quickly. I think the diamond lace baby afghan that I made it from is a paid pattern, but if you search for diamond blanket, there is a free version, this diamond stitch blanket, and so you can get a very, very similar blanket for free if you're looking for a free pattern. We can do a quick look at blankets here. Weirdly, blanket is not one of these choices. Okay, so let's go to view all categories. Search all patterns. Go up here, we want blanket. We want it to be crochet. And we were looking for free. Okay, these are sorted by most popular. Let's see what's hot right now. So these are things that are popular currently. Jake was asking for stuff that was easy in particular, so I would say probably not this one, though. Wow, look at that. That is a really, really cool looking blanket. Really, really stunning color work done in some of these. This is Morbid Sparks by Catherine. Well, the blanket's called Kaleidoscope Blanket. By Catherine Bly. But looks like it's going to be a crochet along starting in January. So this pattern's not actually available, but people are pretty excited about it because it's in the hot right now category. Let's see. As far as easy blankets, this midwife blanket was pretty popular for a while. It is also a baby blanket, or at least intended to be a baby blanket. It would be a fine Afghan. This blanket, you could, there's a show that aired in the BBC called The Midwife. was about midwives in post-World War II London. And there's a lot of pretty hand-knit blankets and crocheted blankets featured in the show. And so this was one that was featured in the show, and they somebody sort of made up a pattern so that you could make it. But it's a pretty interesting pattern. Again, it's got enough interest in it and enough change in each row that it doesn't get boring. I think one of the things about blankets, like, you can just make a single crochet blanket. You can do hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of single crochets over and over and over again. And at least to me, unless you're changing something, I'm gonna get bored really quickly. I made a star blanket. I don't know if it's on, if it's in my library here in my projects. Doesn't look like I posted it, but I can pull it up anyway. It was this one here. So this is a free pattern from Bernat. It looked really cute. I did it in gray and white. But the thing is this pattern is worked from the center, which is fine. You've got this little star here in the center, and then you work a couple of rows out. And what quickly happens is that you started with something that's only about 30 stitches around. And to about here, you're at hundreds of stitches per point. And it gets really old really fast. I got extremely bored doing this because there's nothing interesting going on. It's one little increase here, and then hundreds of double crochets and one little decrease, and then hundreds of double crochets and an increase. And so there's something happening, but it's really far and just solid double crochets, and I apparently have a pretty low threshold for boredom when I'm working with crocheted items. It's the reason I've never made a gigantic blanket. It's the reason I haven't made any of these big motif blankets where you have to make hundreds of the same square. I like doing different things. It's probably the reason I really love 100-gram fingering weight shawls. 100 grams of yarn is just big enough that you get something useful out of it, but not so big that I get insanely bored. So if I do a 200-gram shawl, it better either be important or have some sort of change going on that keeps things interesting. And by important, I mean, like, I really wanted to do this shawl, but you'll notice that, like, through this shawl here, I'm going to switch back to the big view. Through this shawl here, there's a lot of change going on. So this section is different than this section. There's a little bit of a different section here. Then the lace section changes, and then the edging is different again. So this is a big shawl. And like I said, was for my wedding, and so it was important, and I wanted to do this, but it also changed enough that it kept it interesting. If it's gonna be just long repeats of exactly the same thing, so I don't know, it gets boring to me quickly. All right. I don't know. As far as free blanket patterns, it really just matters what you're going to be interested in. So that's kind of a hard one. It depends on the application. It depends on, if you want a baby blanket versus an Afghan versus a bedspread. You probably don't want a real open, lacy bedspread, but you might want an open, lacier baby blanket. So it sort of changes based on application. But certainly, if you're looking on Ravelry, the best thing that I can tell you to do is to use the search the way they intended it to. So if you're on the Ravelry homepage and you go to patterns, you just click up here I think my thing's blocking. So you click right here. So I'll go back. Ravelry homepage. Click on patterns. From patterns, you can click all patterns right here. It's in the sort of the middle of the page here. You can also click view all categories. Either one will get you to where we want to go. So click all patterns. That gets you everything on Ravelry right now. And now we can start narrowing things down. I'm going to choose free. Up here, though, this is where a lot of people will make mistakes. I don't want to search the word blanket, because searching the word blanket's going to look for the word blanket. This is not a blanket. Well, it might be a wrapped blanket. These are squares. There's things in here that I don't necessarily, I don't know. For the most part, I'm getting blankets, but you can get things that happen to have weird words in there. You also don't want to search like the word cowl, because you might miss a scarf that's an infinity scarf. Well, that's the same thing as a cowl, basically. It's just a loop that's instead of a long stick. What you want to do instead is search for the word, but then wait a second, and you'll get this pop down. You can see there's the pop down, and I want to search the category blanket. So now I've got, I'm going to turn off Ravelry download. So now I've got free, and I've got blanket searched. And from there, you can start narrowing things down. So if you have a particular yardage of yarn that you have to use, so say you only have 4 balls of something and you know it's total yardage, you can choose that you want a worsted weight blanket. And let's see, 4 balls of worsted weight is going to be about 800 yards. So I'm going to choose a blanket that's in the 750 to 900 yards. And that gets me a blanket that will be doable in that size. So, or with that amount of yarn. I'm also going to choose crochet, because I only crochet. I don't knit. So those are your choices. This really gives you all of the things that you could make with that particular subset of yarn. One of the things that it's really important to know is that Ravelry limits the pattern designers to only one kind of yarn. So if it's a blanket that they put up and they suggested DK weight yarn, they can't also suggest worsted weight yarn. So it's worth turning on the yarns around what you're using, so that you sort of get the full picture. Because generally speaking, you can substitute in pretty easily a worsted weight yarn for a DK and vice versa. You're going to end up with blankets slightly different size, but generally doesn't matter. Back to the comments. Helen's saying that she's done Afghans for big beds. Queen does get boring. That's why I have so many projects. So that she can jump back and forth. Runaway Needle Red saying Moogly has some of the favorite blanket patterns. Let's take a look at Moogly's patterns. So these are Moogly's. Let's search by designer here. What's her name? Tamara Kelly. There it is. All right. So if we're in her patterns, we can do search these designs. So now I'm showing just Moogly Blogs patterns. They're Tamara Kelly. Now I can do the same thing where I go up and I hit blanket and choose just that category. So here's just the ones in her blanket category, and she does have quite a few really nice looking blankets. I actually don't ever think of her as a blanket designer, but there are quite a few really nice ones here. This faux cabled blanket is really interesting. I assume that means that she's saying that these are not real cables, though they certainly look like they are. maybe they're just V-stitches of some sort. This is as part of a book. So we should check free as well so that we can get those. But yeah, lots of simple patterns here. Looks like this is done. It's called Rose of Love. Looks like there's little hearts intermixed with rows of solid color. So that's interesting looking. It looks really cool from a distance. A little bit more interesting to look at. She's got a houndstooth blanket. I really love houndstooth. This is pretty interesting. This is a ripple blanket that has a square outside, which means it's filled in. So a lot of times ripple blankets will have a wavy edge. So like if we look at this one here, you can see the edge of this blanket is pointy. And so what do I want to say here? It's pointy, so it's harder to put like a border on or something like that. But this is a... Where did I lose that one? This is a ripple stitch blanket that has a square edge or a flat edge, which is a little bit different and looks very nice. So there's a lot of good options here. Let's see. Stampin' Bandits saying Daisy Crafts Farms is another good blanket designer. Runaway Needle Red likes the Neptune's Arrow. I think my husband also liked this one when we looked at it before. I think that's this one here. Is the Neptune's Arrow stitch. Let me see if I can find... This one's Neptune's Stripes. This is the Neptune's Arrow scarf by her as well. So it's just an interesting pattern to look at. It sort of looks like sideways Christmas trees. Let's check out Daisy Farms. Daisy Farm Crafts. Take a look at blankets. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting gingham blankets. I guess they're a little bit different from each other. I don't know why you would necessarily upload a pink, gray, and red gingham if they're not different. Because obviously you can just change colors on any particular pattern, but they are really well done patterns, or at least like pretty to look at patterns. I can't say that the pattern's well done because I haven't downloaded one. I do like the puff stitch to make interesting designs. In this case, it's diamonds, but that always looks really nice. Yeah, there's some interesting things here. I like the playing with texture. So here you can see there's post stitches and then sort of like embossed look to it. So those are pretty cool. Looks like they used a baby velvet here, so it looks like a sort of a chenille style yarn there. So, let's see. That was Leaping Stripes, also a cool and easy design. Leaping Stripes. Leaping Stripes Blocks Blanket. That's actually really cool looking. Looks like it's done in Bernat Home? What is that? Nope, it looks like it's done in cotton. So yeah. There's a ton of blanket patterns. I think Jake is the one who asked to take a look at blanket patterns, and really, unless you've got person in mind. It's hard to choose just a random pattern, because I think that different patterns will speak to different people. And you just have to sort of know your recipient. So if you're making it for yourself, you got to find something that you find interesting. If you're making it for a baby gift, that's a different project than if you're making it for a teenager. If you're making it for your grandma, whoever you're making it for, you sort of have to know the person and know what they're going to find interesting. And then also keep in mind that you have to make it, and it's hundreds and hundreds of stitches. And so you should pick something that is going to hold your interest. So if you're not easily bored, you can do a very simple pattern. If you're like me and you need to be entertained a little bit more, picking something that has a little bit of interest, either color changes or stitch changes, or just a pattern that requires you to pay attention a little bit, might not actually make it difficult, but it may make it more fun or intriguing. So, yeah. So if anyone has any questions or wants to see more on Ravelry, wants to see more on, we were talking about sock yarns earlier. You can ask those in the live chat now. If you are just joining us and you're new to the stream, welcome. Thanks for joining us. If you have questions and you're watching this later on and you're not able to chat in the live chat, you can always ask those in the comment section. You could also find me on Facebook and Instagram at Experiments in Crafting. And you're free to private message me, ask me questions on there. So that's an easy way. I love seeing projects that people are working on. I like helping people pick out yarns or find a perfect pattern for their project, things like that. I'm always happy to do. Just send me a message on Facebook or Instagram. Or, of course, you can leave it in the comment section on YouTube, and I try and keep an eye on those as well. For those of you who are new or maybe just found us for the first time, we live stream most Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. Central Time, and then usually for an hour, a lot of times for 2. And so we cover whatever topics that we think of. And in a lot of cases, topics that you guys suggest. And so if you have suggestions that you'd like to see for next week's stream, I'd love to hear those as well. Somebody suggested doing sort of a pattern year-end review, maybe taking a look at some of the things that I've made in the last year, or taking a look at some of like the most popular trends this year. And so I'm going to try and put that stream together for New Year's Eve. So I figured a sort of year-end review might be the perfect stream for New Year's Eve. I'm not sure if we're going to stream on New Year's Eve or if we're just going to stream close to New Year's Eve. So it may end up having to be like a Monday stream just because I'm not sure what people will be around on New Year's Eve. We will not stream next Tuesday because it's Christmas Eve and my husband and I travel on Christmas Eve. So, we won't be around to stream. We might be able to stream a different day in the week. It just depends on what we decide to do for New Year's Eve. So we probably won't do like a Saturday stream if we're going to stream again on Tuesday or something like that. But if we're going to cancel both Tuesday streams, maybe we'll split the difference and do like a Friday, Saturday. Let's see. A little bit of conversation just between people, and then Stampin' Bandit saying she's working on a Gradient Summertime Path shawl. First time using the yarn, repetitive but fairly new. Gradient Summertime Path. Not familiar with it. Let's try Summertime Path. Summertime Hat? Nope. It comes up under Summertime. Not finding that one. Could just be that it's not on Ravelry. That does occasionally happen. Yeah, if you give me a designer, maybe I can find it on another location. Or maybe I'm just not found it. You gotta let it go. Summer Path. Let's try that. There we go. All right, so this is a gradient. That's probably what was meant. So this is a gradient shawl. Does look like it could get a little bit repetitive. But is very, very, very pretty. So looks very nice. Works up really open. Which means that it's going to have really nice drape and just look really nice. So, simple summertime shawl. That's a different. So this is the simple summertime shawl. That's a slightly different shawl. Though most of what I said stands. It's still pretty open. Still looks like it might be a little bit repetitive, but should work up rather quickly. It looks like a lot of double crochets and chains. So should build pretty quickly. I've made plenty of shawls that were reasonably simple like this, and they do get repetitive, but a nice open shawl is worth it. It's nice to have a really nice open breathable shawl. You can always bunch it up and make it warmer, but it's nice to have that drape. You can just toss it over a tank top and wear it as is. So yeah, my husband's saying it would look really nice in the Twisted Fiber Arts yarns. It would be especially good project for those as well because the balls are relatively small, and so you would get a lot more usage out of it than the shawl that I did before. So the shawl that I did before is this one here. It's relatively lacy, but it has sections where it's, let's lay this out, it'll be easier to show here. Twisted Fiber Arts is a gradient yarn dyer that I really like. This pattern here, though, has lots of more solid sections. There are big holes, so that helps use less yarn. But there's a lot of yarn eaten up in these single crochet sections here that wouldn't be eaten up in a yarn that's primarily chains. So I have a couple more Twisted Fiber Arts gradients, but I think they're in a lower box. I have to move this big bin here. Yep. Somebody was asking earlier the difference between a gradient and a ombre yarn. So this is Lion Brand Faye. And so you can see it fades from a really light blue to a medium blue to a slightly darker blue to a really deep dark blue. And then it looks like I got a little bit of the next ball because there's a little bit of really pale on the outside. But this I would consider an ombre yarn. Where... Hold on a second. I'm going digging for a gradient. I don't know where my Twisted Fiber Arts yarns are at. There's one. This is a Twisted Fiber Arts gradient where there's color changes. This one's a little bit more ombre, just in the sense that the colors don't change crazily. But really, really deep, dark, nearly black in the center. comes out to a dark blue, to a lighter blue, to a purple. So rather than being all one color, it's a series of colors that fade into each other. But like I was saying, the Twisted Fiber Arts yarns are a little bit, I don't want to say short on yarn, but they're sold as sock weight, but they're only about 360 yards, and so that's a little bit shy. And yeah, so it's a little bit less than you would normally expect out of 100 grams of fingering weight yarn. Though I do see that these are listed as a number 2 fine weight yarn, which makes it more of a sport weight. So that probably explains that. But a nice open shawl would be better, which is what my husband was suggesting. Using this pattern because it's a lot more open. All right. Let's see. Dawn, thanks for joining us. Even though you're here late, I'm glad to have you. We're probably winding down here shortly, but I'm up for taking a few more questions if anyone's got questions. I don't always have my laptop, so if there's Ravelry or Instagram or things like that related questions that you guys want to talk about, now's a good time to talk about those. Let's see. Jake's asking if we can look at a hat and explain the hat. If we're talking about specifics on the pattern, I probably will not pull up a copyrighted pattern and walk through it on stream. If I can pull the hat up and just see if there's something different about it. Let's see. So it looks like this hat is probably worked, it appears like it is worked flat. Let's see here. Based on how it looks like it's probably worked flat, joined, and then gathered on one end. If I was just guessing, the only way that you can get ribs going this direction is if your hat would have to be worked up and down. And the only way really to do that is to work this flat and gather it. So my guess is that the pattern is worked flat and then gathered together. Do you want to pull me off street or so that my computer's not live? I'm going to take a look at the pattern real quick and just see. Yeah. So exactly like I was saying, the hat is worked. You work a strip of it. You work back and forth as the pattern says. You repeat. It says rows 3 and 4. So do your repeats on rows 3 and 4. And then you'll join it together in a loop. And then gather it together. So it'll basically be making a really tight cowl. Oh, you want to talk about the curly cues? Doesn't look like there is a pattern for the curly cues, but we could find one real quick. It is pretty weird because... Oh, actually, let's see. Sorry, I'm reading the pattern. I'm not trying to ignore the stream here. Cinch the hat so that the spirals form. Oh, okay. So as part of row 4, you make the curly cues. So what it's doing here is a little bit different than I was thinking. So you work the row, and at the end of the 4th row, let's see, at least it looks like every other row. So on row 3, you're working a straight row. On row 4, you work a curly Q at the end. And then you work row 3 again, you work row 4, you make a curly Q. When you join the whole hat at the end, you cinch it together and all the curly Qs will like flop out. The curly Qs are just made by putting multiple stitches into each chain. So you're going to make a chain, and then it wants you to work multiple stitches in every stitch, which will force it to curl around. As Dawn's mentioning, they're made by increasing. Same concept. You just put a couple of stitches into each stitch, which is the same as an increase. And that gives you these spirals. So hopefully that helps. Like I said, I don't want to show a copyrighted pattern, but I can, if it's a free pattern, I can sort of look at it myself and then see if I can offer some guidance there. One of the things, too, that you can do is if you're on Ravelry, sometimes there's comment section, and you can look through that. So here's the whole comment section, and occasionally there will be some interesting help in there. It doesn't look like... So this person also was having trouble. The designer answered and said that some of their crocheters said that they did better putting 3 rather than 2. So if you go to the comment section, a lot of times there will be people who can help. You can also go to the project pages and see what people have to say here. When you upload a project, you have the opportunity to put comments in. I like to put comments in for myself so that if I have to repeat the pattern, I know what I did. But it's also really helpful to put comments in so that other people can look and go, oh, that's a good suggestion. That backfired a little bit for me the last time I made a hat. A lot of people were saying the hat turned out too small, and they put an extra repeat in, and so I did the same thing, and my hat turned out giant. And so instead of pulling the whole thing out, I've just got kind of a too large hat for myself. So I guess I would say take the help with a grain of salt. People might have really good suggestions, but it might backfire on occasion for you. So, all right. Well, what else you guys want to talk about? Otherwise, I'm thinking that we might wrap up for the evening. Like I said, no stream next Tuesday. But we're gonna try and stream. It is. New Year's Eve is on a Tuesday, so we're gonna try and stream New Year's Eve. If I decide that streaming New Year's Eve is not a good idea, then we'll probably try and split the difference and stream on Friday or Saturday, something like that. As always, I will put that in the on Facebook, on Instagram, and in the community section of YouTube. So, Stampin' Bandits saying that they made the Brainwave hat where people had gauge issues and theirs turned out fine. So yeah, some people just, well, there's always people who will complain about anything. And those people are often the loudest on the internet. So you kind of have to dig through and just see if they're complaining to complain or if there's actually a legitimate issue with the pattern. Like I said, I have a tendency to make hats way too big, but there's one designer that I hit dead on every time. That designer, probably everyone on their page, I haven't actually looked, but probably everyone complains that their hats turn out too small. So there's probably something that myself and that designer do exactly the same that a bunch of other people aren't doing. Which might be that, like, our tension is too high or theirs is too loose. Just depends. But yeah, if you had listened to all of the issues and had used a hook size up, then yours would have been too big. So, like I said, you got to take that advice with a grain of salt, but it is good to look through there and see what issues people had. Just kind of gives you a heads up on what you might run into. Dawn saying thank you for the corner to corner brunette stripes blanket that she made her first corner to corner. That's great. That's actually been one of our most popular videos, and I really like corner to corner projects. If you're looking for the next corner to corner thing to do, I've made Moogly Blog makes a shawl that's called the Fortune Shawlette that is based on corner to corner, works up very, very similar, but it works into this really cool open shawl. And so if you've got kind of a little bit of a bug from the corner to corner and you want to like make your next corner to corner thing, that's a really fun one to do next. So you can take the exact same concept that I showed in the tutorial video and use it very similarly in the Moogly pattern. So I'm glad to hear that you enjoyed the video and that it was helpful for you. So that feedback, it really makes it worth like doing all of the work for a video. I really like to hear that people like the videos and that they're useful and that they learned something. So that's great. Thank you. My husband threw the Fortune Shawlette link in there as well. But that's just a fun one. Alternatively, you might be really bored of corner to corner and you want to do something totally different. So then ignore that. But other than that, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up unless there's some last minute questions anyone wants to throw in. Again, no stream next week. Watch Facebook and Instagram for whether we're going to stream on New Year's Eve or whether we're going to move it to Friday, Saturday, somewhere in there, and cancel both Tuesday streams. So we'll see. We'll make that call later this week, I think. But otherwise, let's see. Stephanie's saying that she always goes back and watches the yarn reviews when she gets a new yarn, even though she watches them when they come out. So that's great to hear. It's fun to know that people out just in the world are watching videos that we've made. So it's a really cool thing. Hopefully the yarn reviews are useful to people. They're not always the newest yarn possible, and I don't always get them out as fast as other reviewers, but I hope that they're in depth and that people appreciate that like I make a project and try and really explain what I like and what I don't like about the yarn. My biggest issue is reviewing yarns that I have no strong feelings about. There are a lot of yarns sitting in my yarn room that are just okay. Like, there's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing, like, amazing about them. They're just a yarn that I bought. So I have the hardest time with those, but if those are useful to people, I guess I can start doing some of those as well. But yeah. Okay, my husband's saying that we have a yarn review coming out probably Thursday or Friday. Is that the solstice yarn? So that's the Plymouth yarn solstice that I shared. I was gonna pull out the cowl. So I made this cowl out of that yarn, and so I've got a review. I also shared that on the live stream, so you guys saw it a couple weeks back, and then I made this cowl up. And I've got a review from that. So, keep an eye out for that coming out later this week. Let's see. Stamp Bandit's saying that they think that my textile background sets my reviews apart. It's an interesting thing, because my yarn background sets me apart at work, like I work at a startup company in textiles, and so like my knowledge of yarn personally makes a difference at work. So it's interesting to hear that my work background makes a difference in my hobby. So that's interesting feedback. But But thank you. I'm glad that there's something that sets the reviews apart. We go to great lengths to make sure that they're well produced and well researched, and that we really cover all of our bases if at all possible. Um, so Stephanie's saying that it's good to know that a particular yarn is not bad, even if it's not anything interesting. So, even if it's just meh. So, there's a lot of those. There's just a lot of yarns that are just fine. They're new, they're different in some way, but they're not necessarily better in any appreciable way. So, all right. Well, I think we're gonna wrap up for the evening. I think I'm probably not gonna repeat that we're not gonna be on next week. So you guys have heard that several times now. Keep an eye out on Facebook, Instagram, at Experiments in Crafting for updates, and also the community tab on YouTube. As always, if you have questions, send them to me wherever. YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. I'm happy to answer those and get back to you. Hopefully after Friday, I'll have a little bit more free time. Work does a little bit of a shutdown for the end of the year, and so I should have some ability to actually chat with people and answer some questions and get some projects done so that I can get some videos out to you guys. So that's the goal for the end of the year. Thank you everyone for watching and for joining me tonight. And I hope you guys have a Merry Christmas if you celebrate Christmas, and a Happy New Year going into 2020. I may or may not see you again before 2020, but the plan is that we will. So have a good night. Thanks for watching. Bye.